Good day, students. Welcome to Dr. Pablo R. Olivares, Senior High School of Olivares College, Parañaque. This is English 003, Oral Communication in Context. I will be your teacher, Mr. Pat A. Yalong. Our first lesson for this subject is the nature and elements of communication. At the end of this lesson, you'll be able to define communication, explain the nature and process of communication, distinguish the different types of communication, and differentiate the various models of communication. Let us begin by answering the question, what is communication? Communication came from a Latin word communicare, which means to interact. Interaction requires two or more people transmitting and receiving information, and when interaction happens, so as communication. It involves a sender or a speaker who imparts ideas, concepts, and data to a receiver or group of receivers through the use of verbal and non-verbal cues. Communication literally happens everywhere. In your home when you talk to your parents or argue with your siblings. In the market when you buy your favorite meal. In your workplace when you talk with your boss, in the cafeteria when you are chatting with your friends, and even right now while you are watching this presentation. Communication is happening. Like other abilities, communication is an innate ability to human beings that enable us to interact with one another. Here is an example of a situation where communication occurs. A student asks permission from his or her parents to attend the school field trip. In that example, we can identify that the sender is the student and the receivers are the parents, while the question or the permission being asked is the information or data that being transferred from the sender to the receiver. In this interaction between the student and his or her parents, communication takes place. Now, you know the meaning of communication. Now we will discuss the first part of our lesson, the importance of communication. You might want to ask, why do we even need to study communication if it is a natural ability in the first place? Well, this natural ability needs to be refined in order for us to unlock its limitless potential. And for us to improve it, we must first understand how it works and how it affects our lives. Communication has a lot to offer. So here are some examples of the importance of communication. Communication gives information. This, we believe, is the most important role of communication. Communication helps spread knowledge and information among people. Through communication, people are able to exchange ideas and create new ones. Communication builds trust. Proper communication is the foundation of trust. People are able to eliminate doubt and fear when they are able to talk and interact with one another. Without communication, people will be filled with unanswered questions and later doubts. Communication prevents or resolves problems. If ever that there is an existing quarrel between people, communication plays a vital role in resolving it. As the old saying goes, there is nothing you can fix with a good talk. Communication provides clarity. Communication helps provide helpful feedback to other people so they can get back on the right track. Also, this can avoid future misinterpretation and problems that may arise from miscommunication. Lastly, communication creates relationships and increases engagements. Communication is the one responsible for creating relationships because it gives people opportunity to connect with each other. If you think about it, we all know a great story that started with a simple hello. At this point, if you are still not convinced on how important communication is, take the word of National Association of Colleges and Employers, or NACE. According to their studies, verbal communication is the most sought after skill by employers. Now, do you think communication is important in your life? Think about it. Now, on this part of the presentation, you will learn the nature of communication. Here, I'm going to discuss the traits or the natural characteristics of communication. Let's begin. First, communication is a process. When we say process, it involves a number of steps or procedures that will result to a specific outcome, meaning the data or information that was sent by the sender will have to pass through several steps in order to reach the receiver and goes back to the sender. On the next part of the presentation, we will further discuss the process of communication. Second, communication is symbolic. Symbols in communication can be words, actions, or both at the same time. We can imagine this as tools used to interact or transfer data or information from the sender to the receiver. Third, communication is irreversible. Any words or actions that was sent out by the sender can no longer be taken back. The information will be received by the receiver. For example, you accidentally hit your finger with a hammer and you shouted a bad word. That shout will be heard by anyone who is near you, and you cannot stop them from hearing it, because words are not something that you can simply take back. Lastly, communication is individually construed. In communication, the information or data that was sent by the sender may have different meaning on the part of the receiver, depending on how he or she interprets the message. According to some studies, interpretation may differ depending on the experience and environment of the people involved in the process. Experience and environment play a vital role in interpreting information and messages. We'll further discuss this topic in the lesson Models of Communication. So there you have it, the nature of communication. This time, we will discuss the elements of communication. When we say elements, we are talking about the things that work together in order to create communication. First in our list, the sender and receiver, or also known as the speaker and listener. These are the people involved in the communication process. The sender or the speaker is the source of information or message. He is the one responsible for sending symbols or signals such as words and gestures. On the other hand, we have the receiver or listener, who receives the symbols or signals from the sender or speaker. The listener is the one responsible for decoding or interpreting the signal of the speaker into thoughts. This way, he or she will be able to understand the message of the speaker. As mentioned earlier, while you are watching this presentation, communication occurs. Right now, I am the speaker, you are the listener, and the words that I am saying are the signals that you are decoding or interpreting. Next, message. It is the result of the interpretation or decoding of symbols uttered by the speaker. In other words, message is the information or data that being transferred from the speaker to the receiver and vice versa. Take note that the interpretation of the receiver is greatly affected by the similarity between the culture and environment of the sender and receiver. Culture and environment is also known as schema, or the prior knowledge of a person based on his or her experience. This is also the collective ideas of a person about the world throughout his or her life. This way, a schema can greatly affect how a person interprets a certain word or information. Communication symbols. A speaker uses symbols in order to encode messages. Symbols can either be verbal, non-verbal, or audiovisual. Verbal symbols are the words that come out from the speaker's mouth. On the other hand, non-verbal symbols do not use words. Instead, it uses body movements or gestures to convey messages. A good example is a thumbs up, which means okay or agree. Just remember that a non-verbal symbol can easily be understood even without the use of words. Lastly, audiovisual. This is a combination of words and visual representation such as graphs and tables to deliver message from the speaker to the listener. For example, on this presentation, the symbol that I use to communicate with you is audiovisual, meaning I use words and presentations to deliver the information to you. The next element is channels. Channels are the medium through which the message is sent. These are the roadway or highway used to deliver the symbols. The most common channel for communication is the air around the speaker and the listener where sounds travel. Other examples of channels are microphones and speakers, like what you are using on this presentation. Noise. Noise is anything that reduces the quality of the signal sent by the sender through the channel. We have two types of noise: the physical noise and the physiological noise. Physical noise are the actual noise that comes from our surroundings, such as loud music or irritating engine of a motorcycle. The physiological noise is when the body of the speaker or listener becomes a hindrance to a good communication. For example, a person cannot listen effectively to a friend, to a music, or do anything that matters because he or she experiences headache or toothache. The last element of communication is feedback. Feedback is the message transmitted by the receiver in response to the message sent by the speaker. In simplest term, it is the reply of the listener or receiver. Feedback enables the speaker and listener to fully interact and communicate with one another. It is said that even if the speaker is great and the message is beautiful, if the listener is not paying attention, then communication fails. Communication is an interactive process that requires listening with ears and eyes. So here are some guides on how to listen effectively. Look for the meaning behind the speaker's words. Effective listener understands even those that are not spoken or even those that are buried between the lines. Concentrate on the message. A good listener will focus on the message and try to resist all forms of distractions such as chatting with a talkative seatmate. Avoid being critical on the speaker's manner of delivery and physical appearance. Concentrate more on the message, not on the movements and appearance of the speaker. Do not fake attention. If you must listen, then listen to understand the message. Communication comes about when the message is imparted as information. At the minimum, two persons are involved in the process. One who delivers the message, and the other receives and interprets the message. Here, we are going to look at the different steps on how a message is transferred from the speaker to the listener. In this example process, we will use verbal as our symbol of communication. The process starts when the speaker converts or encodes her thoughts into signals. This happens in the mind of the speaker, where she constructs her thoughts into sentences. Once the speaker has converted her thoughts, she will now send the signals through a channel such as air or microphone. On this part, as the signals are sent through the channel, there might be some noise like loud music and vehicle engines that may reduce the quality of the signals. Eventually, the receiver or listener hears the signals. Then, he will automatically convert or decode the signal into thoughts. Once the message is understood by the receiver, he will now send a feedback or a reply to the speaker using the same process. The next part of our lesson is the types of communication. Since that we're done with the nature, elements, and process of communication, we are now ready to discuss the different types of communication. There are 4 types of communication that depends on the elements present in the communication process. The first type of communication is the intrapersonal communication. Intrapersonal is when you are talking to yourself, meaning you are both the speaker and listener. You speak to yourself and you listen to yourself. You can imagine this process like you are talking to yourself in front of a mirror. And yes, this is absolutely normal. Well, in fact, this type of communication is further divided into 2 types: the deliberation and the meditation. Deliberation is when you tap into your inner thoughts to deliberate decisions or possible courses of action. Also, this is when you usually question yourself whether if the actions that you have done in the past is right or wrong. Meditation is when you think of your life and everything that is involved in it. Usually, this is what you do when you want to gather all your thoughts and appreciate the things that you have done in your life. Most of the time, people engage in this type of communication when they want to seek peace and clarity. The second type of communication is the interpersonal communication. This is the exact opposite of intrapersonal communication. This type of communication requires other people as listeners. There are 2 types of interpersonal communication: dyad and small group. Dyad is when a speaker is talking to one person, also known as the one-on-one talk. This type of communication maximizes the possibility of effective feedbacking between participants. Small group is when a speaker is talking to 2 or more people. The possibility of clarification and feedback is lessened because there is more than one person to adjust to. And any attempt to clarify may actually disrupt the flow of the communication. The third type of communication is public communication. This type of communication involves a wide group of people with varied traits, background, interests, and persuasions. Therefore, requires a lot of background explanation in expressing your ideas. Engaging in this type of communication also requires you to avoid topics or discussions that may be understandable to only a select few. In addition, when communicating publicly, you must avoid any comments that may be offensive to a particular group of people. Public communication also limits the opportunity for feedback and clarification due to the large number of participants. A good example of public communication is a seminar or a campaign where a speaker stands in front of a crowd to discuss a particular topic. Last on our list is the intercultural communication. This type of communication is when a speaker interacts with a person or group of people who may not share the same beliefs, values, or point of view, especially if the speaker and the listeners came from different culture. To make the exchange more meaningful, there should be a deeper understanding and awareness of what makes various nationalities different and unique, but also similar and familiar. So there you have it. Now you know the different types of communication. On this last part of the lesson, we will discuss 4 different models of communication, categorized as linear models and circular models. Let's have first the linear models, or the models of communication that believe that communication is generally a one-way process that originates from a speaker. Our first model is the Shannon-Weaver model, also known as the mother of all models. This model was written by Claude Shannon, who was an American mathematician and electronic engineer, and Warren Weaver, who was an American scientist. Their model of communication is a mathematical theory of communication that gave us the concept of noise. The model deals with various concepts like information source, transmitter, channel, noise, receiver, and destination. The information source is the originator of message. The transmitter is the one that converts the message into signals that would pass through channels such as cables and satellites. The receiver converts those signals into messages which is understandable for the destination. According to Shannon Weaver, noise can be categorized into two: the internal noise and the external noise. Internal noise happens when a sender makes mistakes in encoding the message or a receiver makes mistakes in decoding the message. On the other hand, the external noise happens when something external that is not in the control of the sender or receiver disrupts the message. A good example of this model is a conversation of two people over a telephone. The second model of communication that believes that communication is generally a one-way process is the Berle's model of communication. In 1960, David K. Berlo published El Proceso de la Comunicación, or the process of communication, in which he described his SMCR model of communication. Berle's model includes a number of factors under each element: the source, which includes communication skills, attitudes, knowledge, social system or environment, and culture; the channel, which includes the five senses: hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, and tasting; and the receiver, which includes the same elements as the source. Berle's model believes that for effective communication to take place, the source and the receiver need to be on the same level. Only then communication will happen or take place properly. For example, if the communication skills of the source is good, then the receiver should have the equally good listening skills. This way, a good communication will occur. Now, let's have the models that believe that communication is a two-way process between a sender and a receiver. Dean Barland's transactional model of communication. This model believes that sending and receiving of messages happens simultaneously between people. This model is a multi-layered feedback system. This is a continuous process where sender and receiver interchanges their places and both are equally important. The message passing takes place with a constant feedback being provided from both parties, where a feedback for one is the message for the other. The last model of communication that we will discuss is the Osgood-Schramm model of communication. Osgood-Schramm model is built on the theory that communication is a two-way street with a sender and a receiver. Like the other models, this includes an encoder, interpreter, and a decoder. This model of communication is very simple and easy to understand. Just remember, under this model, communication is a circular process that involves feedbacking and messaging by both sender and the receiver. So there you have it, students. Now you know the nature and elements of communication. Again, I'm Mr. Pat A. Yalong. Thank you for listening.
Happy learning at home with lessons made easy by Olivarian GoTeach. One proud Olivarian.